Welcome back to A Celtic State of Mind. It's Wednesday afternoon, 12:30. I'm Paul John Dykes. I'm delighted to be joined by Patrick McGilpin and also John Yogi Hughes. And we cannot start the show on anything else other than that merchandise that you are sporting. John, that needs to be on the online shop. That's a belter. Talk to us about that merchandise.
Well, this was a surprise gift from Paddy Lavery at Friday's event in Belfast in the Crumlin Star. And I don't know if it's Paddy, I don't know if it's the CSC in total that did it, but I mean, I certainly wasn't expecting it. So I was very, very touched. I thought it was very thoughtful. I thought it was hilarious. Once I stopped laughing, I thought, that's unbelievable, going out of your way to do that for someone. So I just thought it was a fantastic gesture. They're a class bunch of lads. It was a fantastic event, unbelievably well organised, well marshalled, and the venue is fantastic. Crumlin Star, never heard of it, but you know what a great spot. So it was absolute quality. It was a fantastic night. I was buzzing for a day after it. It was just brilliant. Sutton was, I mean, I wasn't expecting that. I expected you to do your normal, interview this guy and, ask him some questions and, see what the crack is and try and elicit some responses. You didn't get a word in for the first hour.
I know.
I'm not sure you spoke.
Honestly, I just throw the bone. I throw the bone. And you just let Chris run with it. It's tremendous.
He's just phenomenal. He's a stand-up comedian, basically. Every story he told had a punchline. Everyone that interrupted him got destroyed.
That's right.
So it was absolutely fantastic. It was hilarious. It was such a great night's entertainment. And the place was electric. It was absolutely buzzing. People were so happy that we were there, happy to have the event there. It really was. Top notch, absolutely top notch. Couldn't say enough about it. If you get a chance to get along to some of these events, couldn't recommend it highly enough. Now, they won't always be 100%. I mean, the last one we were at wasn't an Acsom event, but that wasn't exactly 100%. So,
what did I describe it as? A wild house.
It depends on the crowd, doesn't it? Very much depends on the crowd. So, but it was absolute quality. I'm still delighted about it. I can't believe someone went out of their way to do this, and just really class lads. And thank you so much to Paddy and his comrades. It was absolutely fantastic.
It was, John, and I'm glad that we've opened with that because I won't tire bigging these lads up. I've got to say that they've obviously given me a gift as well. That came back on the ferry. I flew back. And so once that arrives, I'm going to be showing that off and that will be taking pride of place up on one of these shelves. But the Ardoyne boys sent us a Christmas present a few years ago, every single year since then, a Christmas card. And that's Paddy in the comments. So I know that we have a bit of ding dong and we slag each other off and all that stuff. But absolute salt of the earth, these guys. And we will be back. We absolutely will be back. Patrick, hopefully you can join us one of these times when we're on a road trip, mate. You're good for an away day.
I've been to a few Acsom home fixtures, I suppose, in Glasgow, but I've yet to venture to an away day. It looked like a brilliant night. I mean, I've been to a few in Graces and in Bad, and I mean they are fantastic. And it shows. I mean, the interaction is there. They interact on here every day. It's not just an hour at lunchtime. It's these events have been sort of a constant in the calendar for the last sort of 2.5 years, 3 years, and they are brilliant. And it's brilliant to interact with, the sort of all the guys who comment and have commented for years regularly. As I say, it looked like a smashing night. I wasn't there, but Chris Sutton's just brilliant value. And I seen a bunch of photos. It looked as if it went on for hours and hours. The amount of photos I seen of the both of you. So I would highly recommend. And Sutton's obviously a bit of a Celtic legend, so I'm glad he's had a great night. I'll need to get over.
Without a doubt, got to do an Acsom away day, Patrick. And I've also got to say to Paddy and the lads, and also our friends in Trinent and Camelin, who we've been visiting this year, there is an Acsom gift. We're just waiting for them to be made. They're not going to be mass produced, but we're waiting for them to be sent in, and then we will get them out to the CSCs. There's nothing better than going out and meeting these people. Thanks everybody for getting involved this week. I know that it's been a very sad week, and we will be touching on the passing of Lisbon Lion John Clarke. There's a real bond, John, and I want to start with yourself because I noticed this from the players themselves, but also from their offspring. I remember talking to Sean Fallon Jr., who constantly throughout the discussion called Jock Stein Uncle Jock. You talk to Neely Mockin, he's friends with all the remaining Lions, all the offspring, as I say. It's an incredible bond, John, and every time we hear of the sad news that one of them has passed on, it really hits hard, big man. And I know that you are part of that bond, you're part of that group, and we should always keep their spirit alive. We should always discuss them.
Yeah. No, it's very sad to hear about John. So I hadn't seen John now for since my dad's funeral, and I knew he wasn't well. But all I really knew was he was in hospital. I wasn't expecting that, so that was a blow. John in particular, what a servant to Celtic he is, and he was, and what a very special man in multiple roles. So, these things happen, they're getting on a bit, but we are losing that connection to the greats.
And Will, it's big man, I know it's tough for you. You're closer than most to this kind of thing, and we will continue to celebrate them year on year. As I keep saying, it shouldn't always be the 25th of May every year. It should be at every single opportunity. What they guys did for this football club, they put us on the map, Patrick. They actually put Celtic on the map. I love speaking to some of the old heads, Pat Woods, for example. And I was going to say Jim Orr, but he's not an old head, although he has an old head on him. He is the oracle. And he talks about Celtic pre-Lisbon, and what Celtic were pre-Lisbon compared to where they are now. So I think it's one of the ones whereby we just need to keep flying the flag, and we always will. We'll always talk about the Lions.
Absolutely. And, I was very lucky to meet John once. My school was shut for a general election, so I went to a Celtic Park as a young 14-year-old, and John, not only being the kit controller, I think was helping out with the, I think it was the under-21s or the under-23s or something. So I think Scott Brown was the assistant manager, and John was still in and around both the first team and the youth squad, so he was just sort of waiting around in the lobby. So I was lucky enough to meet him and get a photo with him. So an absolute honour to meet any of these guys. I was only lucky enough to meet a handful of them, but these guys really did put us on the map. It's what makes Celtic stand out in sort of global and European football. The fact that we were, champions of Europe, and it's something that we obviously always celebrate every year, and it's obviously the pinnacle of the club, and it will never be sort of beaten in that sense. Even if we were to win a Champions League, I mean, the fact that these guys were 30 miles from Celtic Park. The achievement sort of stands alone as a sort of sporting achievement. Never mind sort of Scottish football or European football. So it's obviously sad that time does unfortunately march on, and we're losing more and more of them sort of year on year. But I mean, legendary status doesn't even sort of fit the bill for the squad from that season. So it was tremendously sad on Monday. He was always sort of, even recently, you sort of remember seeing him on the bench, and you sort of forget that these guys, what age they are, and you think they'll just sort of be around forever. The sort of bubbliness and sort of liveliness of them all, and the way that they tell stories is just absolutely incredible. So it did come as a bit of a surprise, even though with John Clarke's age, but to have been in that team, to have played for Celtic so long, and to have been employed and worked at Celtic for so long, I'm not sure there's actually anyone that compares to John Clarke in that regard, just how long he was at the football club. So an absolutely incredible man, incredible contribution to Celtic, and I definitely won't be forgotten.
No, absolutely not. A legend. And I said it, people will disagree. I said it at the beginning of the week. I think there needs to be a statue for every single one of the men who were involved in that incredible triumph. Be that up the Celtic way or in their hometowns, it should definitely happen. And hopefully in the fullness of time, we will see that. We're welcoming your thoughts on all things Celtic today. Get in amongst the comments section. Hopefully Paddy Lavery's in there because I'll tell you something, that has become Big Yogi's catchphrase. Show some testicular fortitude. And the thing is, John, I think when you said it, it was a throwaway line, but we just kept going back to it. And now there's a t-shirt. This is your slogan. This is your "We Never Stop."
Yeah, well, I mean, it didn't mean anything to start off with, as you say, but just come back to it a few times, and you could use that in a lot of things. And actually, just as I was coming on here, I bought some pins, some Palestine pins in the shape of Ireland off another listener. And when I was putting it on here, I think that could apply to our political leaders as well, couldn't it? So it can apply to a lot of people nowadays. So yeah, I mean, it's just I can't believe, it's difficult when you come on here. You think you're just coming on, you're just having a chat, you go away and you go about your business. But people are actually remembering things that you're saying, which I don't know if that's disturbing or comforting. I don't know, because a lot of the time, 90% of what I'm saying, you should probably just forget. But it's I was very touched by it. It was a tremendous gesture.
No, it was a tremendous gesture, and it was great to be in amongst like-minded Celts. As John said, I walked into that room for the first time when it was mobbed, and there was an incredible energy in the room. And there's a lot of energy coming through these comments constantly, and it's great that during the pre-season, and I actually mentioned this during the halftime break while stuffing my face off pizza alongside Chris Sutton himself. He was asking if we were taking a break over pre-season. I says, no, we still do it every day. And he says, well, fair play to you, because that must be really, really difficult. But to be honest with you, I actually think that there's so much to discuss during the pre-season. You get all the usual, Patrick, all the links. There's loads and loads of links. I'm keeping a list of them. And at the end of the summer, a very, very small percentage will come to fruition. But you've also got things like, well, the friendlies have just been announced. So we're going to get there's going to be 6 friendlies in July, just round the corner. And also we have big changes within the world of Scottish football. And I think it's important to talk about some of that as well. Last week, Quinny, who does have his finger on the pulse beyond the Celtic bubble, he keeps his eye on a lot of what's happening throughout European football and beyond. He spoke about Hearts. And he said that, he says this is going to divide opinion, but they're going to divide Celtic and Rangers. They're going to split the two sides for Glasgow. It was a bold suggestion. They're going to finish second, said Quinny. There's been a development, obviously, brewing for a while, Patrick, and now it's happened, and they're being bullish. We were talking yesterday about the bullish talk from elsewhere, whereas Celtic will just quietly go about their business. And we're getting a wee bit of that out of Tynecastle. What do you make of Tony Bloom's comments?
Well, I think it would be encouraging if you're a Hearts fan. I know they've got the foundation of Hearts, and they were basically fan owned up until this, I think, with a few minor exceptions. And it is great to see fan ownership. Obviously, there's been a lot of very famous Scottish football clubs who have teetered with bankruptcy, and some who have been liquidated. So it's good to see a sort of sense of stability in fan ownership, and 24, that sort of German model of 50% plus one. But I think for a 29.9% stake, to have a guy that professional, that serious, that experienced in building a club up, in Tony Bloom, and to have his data and analytics behind him. I can't remember the name of the company that he owns, but they monitor everything from, I think it's genuinely the length of grass and the weather on each day and all that sort of stuff. I mean, the detail that he goes into in his research and his analysis is frightening. So to have someone like that at Hearts, I think they're definitely going to be favourites going forward to get that third place spot. I said, I think maybe a month ago when he first joined, that I think McInnes is that sort of caretaker role. You sort of know what you're getting with David McInnes in Scottish football. He's going to get the most out of the squad and no more. but certainly 2-3 years down the line, we know that he's in it to build the club up, and probably he's got no emotional connection there. It might be a feeder club for Brighton. He might want to sell his share and make a bit of money 10-15 years down the line. But he runs a professional outfit at Brighton. I think he's got that USG in Belgium. They've played Rangers a few times in qualifiers, and I think they won the league for the first time just there. And I think Hearts signed, I think they had a loan player from USG and they've signed him permanently. I can't remember the boy's name. But it's a tremendous appointment. If I was a Hearts fan, I would be absolutely delighted with that. That he's now involved in the ownership structure. Just the track record he's got at Brighton. So I think they are certainly favourites to finish third year on year now, and that is only good for Scottish football. Tynecastle's a hard place to go, even when Hearts are weak. But I mean, going back to the sort of O'Neill Strachan days, it was a really, really difficult venue. And getting a result there was just brilliant. And we could be going back to that where they are so strong that both. I don't know about splitting the two Glasgow teams, but I think both sides will probably have more of a game in their hands playing Hearts now. And long term, sky's the limit. And just on Scottish football, sorry, if they can finish third every season, they can win a few qualifiers, get into the league phase of probably the Conference League, if we're being honest, and then pick up a few points in the Conference League and do that consistently. I mean, that's what Tony Bloom will be considering here. Hearts as a force in Europe in that Conference League. That can only benefit Scottish football, raise the country's coefficient, and hopefully attract more players to Scotland and raise the profile. So I think it's a great appointment for Scottish football. Not an appointment, a great investment for Scottish football, great investment for Hearts. I don't think it's a concern for Celtic winning the title. To be honest, I don't think they'll be looking to win the title anytime soon, if at all. But to provide sort of tougher opposition, I think we should welcome that as Celtic fans. It makes the league better, and therefore should make Celtic better.
I've said certainly since the beginning of Acsom, John, that there are clubs that need to step up. There's clubs in Scottish football that need to step up. I look at the capital clubs and I think they're perennial underachievers. And, they just go from one disaster to the next. They sack a manager, they bring in loads of new players, and then it's just rinse and repeat. This kind of thing, when I look at this, and I look as though it looks as though there is a strategy, John. I don't expect anything less than the owner of a football club to come out and be confident and be bold or even bullish, because they've got to obviously appeal to their own fan base. They've got to give their own fan base a bit of belief. They've got season tickets to sell themselves and all this kind of stuff. But I think it's a wee bit more than bluster, John. Tony Bloom does have a track record, as Patrick says there. And although I'm not sure they'll divide or split the two Glasgow clubs, I think what you'll see is a vast improvement, because last season was a disaster for Hearts.
Well, yeah, I'd start off by saying at least it seems to be a more traditional investment in the club rather than the smoke and mirrors we're seeing from the other side of Glasgow. As far as I can tell, he's invested 9.86 million, and that's 9.86 million more than anyone else has invested in any other clubs recently, because he didn't ask the fans to pay for it for him. So there is that. So I would say, yeah, I mean, we've repeatedly said if these clubs were better run, there would be far more of a challenge. Mm-hmm. Because we're going there, we're expected to win the vast majority of our games, the vast majority, and then sometimes, you're thinking it's only going to boil down to the Rangers games, and then what's happened is they've been garbage as well, so that's not even that. So we've been able to lose a lot of games. Last year I think there's many other years we would have lost that league. I think that with the double challenge coming, I'm not concerned about that. Because when I say challenge, I mean it's going to be challenging to try and work out how this is going to shake things up. Can we be expecting to drop points at Hearts away from home now, all that sort of thing. Would that be still considered a decent result if we get a draw there? How tough are they going to be? He said he could disrupt things. Aye, he could disrupt things, but I think the disruption will come in second place. So I don't think he's going to disrupt first. Of course he's got to be bullish. The guy's just invested up nearly 10 million quid in a business. What are you going to say? Well, fingers crossed. Let's hope for the best. It's he's got to do something. He wants to sell as much merch. He wants to get as many bums on seats as possible. He's got a job to do there, and the guy he's installing as his proxy has a job to do there as well. So, but they're going to have the advantage of a lot of infrastructure that comes from elsewhere, in terms of how things should be run, the scouting department, all of that. That infrastructure is going to come with them in terms of how they need to set things up. So, that's going to be a massive advantage for them. They're going to be professionally run. So that will make a difference immediately, I think, or very quickly, I think. Give them a couple of transfer windows, all that sort of thing. But just in the running of the club in general, I think they'll benefit. We'll start benefiting financially from that. The Hearts supporters will think they've got a shout. And, fair play. If that keeps them interested, we need bigger crowds. We always want a challenge. And we saw what happens the end of last year. And look, we all want to win things, and we always want to win everything. But we saw what happened at the end of last year when there's no jeopardy. Mm-hmm. Do you know what I mean? The league was essentially won, and we just dropped off a cliff in terms of our form, because these guys are going out there, and everyone expects them just to be 100% all the time. I certainly do. I expect them to be 100% when they're pulling on that jersey. But the difference between, to have a gap the size that we have, you need much, much, much better players in order to maintain that, right? Because, winning's not that easy, and people having a good day can, give you a hard time. If you are not, if the guys switch off, that sort of 5% mental, of the game, which separates the very top players from the next level down. If it's not there, you're going to suffer. You're not going to win every game. You're going to have difficult results. You're not going to play well. Form's going to dip. And players, like everyone else, are inspired by a challenge. You've got to get your adrenaline going. You've got to get up and get out there and be up for the game and be excited by it. Because the other thing is you have to remember is these guys are playing football all day, every day, right? So any job can be a grind. And certainly when you've already, I had a boss once, he was the best boss I ever had. He took things at a macro level, and we had targets. And as long as I hit those targets, he couldn't give a monkey's what I was doing day to day. Couldn't give a monkey's. And the next guy that came in after him was a micromanager. So he wanted to know what you were doing every 15 minutes. So there's a difference here in terms of attitude, from the players and how they're getting managed, and how really we're sort of driving them to achieve these goals that we have, because it must be so almost disheartening to go into training every morning and you're thinking this game's coming up. There's a 90% chance we'll win it without getting out of second gear. Who really cares? We've already won this league. We're just humans. So anything we can do to, because you don't want to be micromanaging the situation. You want to be giving them freedom. But at the same time, that needs to be, that attitude needs to be generated by something. It can't just be by the manager saying, you're not doing very well. They need to be excited. They want to play the game. They want to have fun playing the game. There's the great things about, being a football player. You can have fun doing your job. It's do something you love. But I don't know. It's I certainly, as long as we do what we need to do, which is my main concern, and by concern I don't mean it's just what I'll be looking at. I am concerned. Starting to get with the Tisdale fella, not to go off on thing, but with the Tisdale fella, I'm starting to get Mark Lowell vibes. In terms of the people we appear to be looking at and people we've turned down. So it's going to take a bit of convincing, I think, and again, bring that one up and bring up the further topic that immediately follows on from that, is because I think if it is a Mark Lowell show and that's what the board have backed, and Brendan doesn't get what he wants and Brendan walks at the end of the year, there's no chance he'll stay. If it's going to be another one of those windows, they sign 16 people and 3 of them are first team starters, maybe.
It just can't happen again. We were talking about it last week in relation to the money wasted. It was the chunk of the Jota money was just absolutely spraffed. 20 million quid down the Swanee. If you're wondering why we're talking about the team that plays at Tynecastle, it's because Tony Bloom has made a huge investment in that football club. And this was one of his quotes yesterday, which I found quite interesting. I am absolutely thrilled to be investing in Hearts. Of course you are, Tony. I mean, you wouldn't say I'm gutted to just be throwing 10 million quid down Gorgie. I firmly believe in the club's ability, this is the interesting bit, to disrupt the pattern of domination, not the pattern of assistance, the pattern of domination of Scottish football, which has been in place for too long. Well, it's been in place because the people that win trophies work harder. I love that comment. I love that quote last year. Celtic have had all their ducks in a row. They've had a strategy. They've stuck to it. Even when, they constantly get pressurised by fans like us to do different things and approach things differently, they've stuck to their guns. So, yeah, absolutely. Bring it on. Bring on the challenge is what I say. Let us know in the comment section what you think as well. We've also got plenty to talk about in relation to the impending return of Shaun Maloney. Divide an opinion, Patrick, in the comment section. What was your memory of Maloney as a player?
Very faint and vague. My memory doesn't really stretch back that far, unfortunately, not to make you both feel old again.
By the way, John.
I mean, I've obviously seen videos and stuff, but
of Shaun Maloney. Oh my God.
My God. As soon as I said it, John, I went, wait a minute. Paddy's too young for Shaun Maloney. That's wild. That's wild.
I think I was 9 or 10 when he left, unfortunately. So I hate to say that. No, I mean, I've seen videos, obviously, promising young player when he first broke through, and my dad still doesn't forgive him for that free kick in the 120th minute in Seville. That he skied over the bar, but obviously has that wonder goal against Rangers in sort of 2005-06. Came back under, was it Mowbray and Lennon, done quite well. I wasn't a great fan of him as a manager, to be honest. I thought he sounded a bit cocky as a sort of first-time manager. I mean, that was 6.5 years ago, I think. So he's hopefully learned since then. And if Brendan wants him on his staff, then he must be a decent coach. So I'm quite happy if Brendan's happy. And obviously he'll aim to learn from that. I know quite a few people I think have visited Lennox Town when Brendan's the manager. I know Mulgrew's done it in the past. I think he's decided management isn't for him right enough. I'm sure, I think Martin Canning done it back in sort of 2017. And there's probably others that I just can't remember at the moment. But, more than happy to bring in a coach if Brendan's happy. It sort of does feel like a boot room at times. I think I've said that in the past. What's the point in having world-class facilities if we just hire former players to coach the kids? But, Brendan is a top-level coach. He demands the highest standards. If he's happy, then I'm happy. Just to go slightly back onto Tony Bloom, I do remember a point about 10 years ago when the 4 years that Scottish football was sort of show jumping and Celtic were competing with Aberdeen for the title. The only reason Aberdeen were able to compete was because they fancied themselves to win the other 10 the games against the other 10 teams, if that makes sense. if Hearts can win consistently against those other 9 teams and even against Rangers and maybe a couple of draws against Celtic at Tynecastle, there's no reason that they can't split Celtic and Rangers. I think they're dead set favourites for third place now. But if they are consistent, which I think Rangers have struggled with as well, against sort of quote unquote lesser teams, if they can get that consistency in 30 of their 38 games, there's no reason why they can't compete in that sort of top 2 spots. But I mean, Maloney, I'm sure we'll probably hear from him throughout the pre-season in some sort of interview. You know, a lot of our coaches have sort of gone on and done other things. I know I think Q went back to Australia, Japan, didn't they? Damien Duff went to Ireland. Darren O'Dee's obviously just went to Swansea there. John Kennedy, I think he's been tapped by Hibs once or twice. And I think it probably is inevitable that he will be Celtic manager one day. It's just a matter of when, in my opinion. So quite a few coaches have went on done other things. So it'll be a good experience for Maloney. As I say, if Brendan's happy, I'm happy. So it should be interesting for the season ahead.
I get both sides of this argument, John, because on the one hand, we absolutely love that heartbeat of the football club, the bloodline of the club, you know, ex-players still being involved. I think that's so important. And we talk about it all the time on here. I really do think it's important. I mean, I've used that example of Kennedy, and, you know, when Kennedy signs for Celtic, the picture is of him and Stephen McManus as young boys, and the guy behind them is Willie McStay. I don't know why that's given the thumbs up there. When Willie McStay signs for Celtic, there's a similar picture, and the guy behind Willie McStay is Sean Fallon. And then you ask yourself, well, who signed Sean Fallon for Celtic? That was Jimmy McGrory. And who signed Jimmy McGrory? Well, it was Willie Maley. So you go right back to the first manager, and there's a bloodline. I think it's deadly important, John. But I also see the argument in relation to if there's a position to be filled, then maybe the best person to fill that position is not an ex-Celtic player. And that's a lot of the comments that I can see coming through. I'm going to bring up a few of them. And saying that, though, Shaun Maloney is a highly thought of coach. I know it's not worked out when he has been given the reins himself, but maybe he's just not a manager, John. He's worked with Martinez, isn't he, with the Belgian national team, that a great set of players that they had. He's maybe just not a manager. He's maybe a very good coach. And I think to get him involved with the youngsters, to make him Darren O'Dee's replacement as one of the pathway managers, for me, I think it's a positive. What's your take, John?
Well, first of all, as far as I can tell, does the pathway manager do any coaching? I got the impression it was to do with loan moves and, you know, keeping these guys, you know, occupied at other clubs if they're not staying with us. Try to make sure that they're getting game time elsewhere if they're not getting it with us, so there is a pathway to the first team. Yeah. I'm not sure how much of his actual previous experience is relevant, but if it is anything to do with coaching, then he's certainly extremely well qualified, and better qualified, I would say, than Darren O'Dea is. I mean, he's been a manager twice. So he was manager with Wigan as well. And he was obviously manager with Hibs, and then the Belgian national team. It's a big deal. Belgium lost to the eventual winners there in the quarterfinals, I think it was. So, you know, in that tournament in 2020. So he's got some great experience. You know, and all the people saying jobs for the boys. How many people do you think with the appropriate qualifications applied for the job of pathway manager at Celtic? How many people do you think were better qualified than Shaun Maloney for the job of pathway manager? You know what I mean? How does that even translate when you're sending it around the world in a global CV? Do you think you're going to be laying paths? You probably think it's probably a manual labour job. You know, get the cement down, lads. No, yes, I understand the jobs for the boys accusation, but I mean, for a job like that, you know, that job was essentially created for Darren O'Dea.
Yeah.
So I know a lot of people were surprised that anyone was going to replace him at all. So to have someone of Maloney's quality come in, a job which isn't, I don't think, you know, is an important cog as we're trying to make the situation better. I think he's certainly a good man to have on board, but I don't think the jobs for the boys, someone's got to have applied for the job that's better than him, and I think that's very, very unlikely. You know, I don't know what they pay the pathway manager, but I don't know. I doubt it is English Premier League money. You know what I mean? So all he needs to do is keep the verges trimmed, and he'll be fine.
He applied for a Dundee job recently, and it's not that he got knocked back, but they certainly couldn't agree terms. Otherwise, he might have been managing in the Premiership. And you think to yourself, well, we've got him in a relationship or pathways role where he's working with the young guys. I think it's a good thing. I'll go back to an episode recently that I did of This Is Acsom, and I spoke to Paul Sludden, whose dad John was on the ground staff. John was Neil Mockin's nephew. He scored in that famous Wembley 5-4 victory over England when Paul McStay ran the show. He scored 2, actually. And John Sludden and Danny Craney were brought back to Celtic by Tommy Burns to work with the kids. And you think to yourself, well, is that an old pals act? Yeah, but it worked. It absolutely worked. There was an identity there. And Tommy Burns wanted there to be an identity with the young guys. And then you start running through the players that Danny Craney and John Sludden worked with, and you're talking about Callum McGregor, James Forrest, Kieran Tierney, all these players that went on to become the cogs, the massive cogs in this success that we've had. So I'm not ready to write it off. I'm absolutely not ready to write that off. I look at the Celtic backroom team, and you've got John Kennedy, of course, you've got Stephen McManus, Johnny Hayes is involved in there, Darnell Day's just left, and we've got Shaun Maloney. It's important to have the identity of the football club. So I do understand the concerns, Patrick, but at the same time, that's very, very important to Celtic. You know, the boot room, I think it's a good thing.
Just about to say that, the boot room.
Yeah.
You know, nobody ever slagged the boot room.
Exactly.
Nobody ever thought that was a terrible idea. You know, so I'm 100% with you. I mean, I think, you know, we talk about losing our identity. Sorry, Patrick. We talk about losing our identity in this ever-expanding sort of European situation. And the more that we become categorised as sort of minnows in the European front, the more isolated we sort of become from the top table. Mm-hmm. So that's a major issue we've got to contend with. But one of the things you don't want to do is end up in a situation where, you know, things that here people explaining the culture to people, because Celtic actually do have one. What you don't want is the kind of situation like Man United have got at the moment. And I was just watching a thing that the boy Garnacho wearing a Rashford's Villa t-shirt. You know what I mean? And you're just like, I mean, if one of our players did that, he'd be throttled to the street. He wouldn't make it home. You know, it's just, you know, we have we do have a culture and identity of which we're very, very proud.
Yeah.
And so I think a boot room for us is a great idea. But with, you know, guys have to be qualified, obviously, and I don't think you can argue that Maloney's not qualified. But I think it is important to have the identity of Celtic and the importance of, you know, what it means to the fans and all the rest of it. And I don't just mean that as, you know, you pay lip service to it. Oh yeah, it's then, you know, the fans are great and all the rest. I mean, people who feel it, who understand it, who know what it means, and aren't just paying lip service. You know, I think that's very, very important. I have no problem with that at all. I would think it would be great if we had a boot room type scenario, because we do have guys here who don't know anything about the club and they're just passing through. But while they're here, we need to make them realise what this club means, what it's about, what it stands for, what it doesn't stand for, and what it won't tolerate.
You know, I always remember hearing a story about the way that Ajax would attract young players, because, you know, it's one of the ones where sometimes they just need that wee added margin to get the deal over the line. And then, you know, the kid would get a chap at the door, and it was Patrick Kluivert standing there to come in and speak to his mum and dad. So I do think there's a massive bonus and there's a massive onus on Celtic to retain that identity. And then the guys coming through, these kids coming through, we keep saying this, we lose them before they kick a ball for the first team, Patrick. So I do think it's important to embed that identity in these younger players from a young age. Let us know what you think in the comments section. Loads more to talk about, and we're going to be covering it all. We've been looking at the pre-season and who's been having a good one for their respective nations. I shouted out yesterday Paulo Bernardo. I think that every season over the last few years anyway, Patrick, there's a player who's already within the club who has that breakout campaign. I think we've seen it with Liam Scales is quite an obvious one. We've seen it with Matt O'Reilly. We've seen it last season with Dyson Maeda, already at the club, and then they just go up another couple of levels. Are we going to see it with Paulo Bernardo? I mean, he has starred for Portugal, albeit he's one of the guys that's basically in primary 7, but he's playing at primary 5 level. He's 23 playing for the 21s, absolutely bossing it. Is he going to be this guy? Because it's a massive season for him, Patrick, going into his 3rd campaign at Celtic.
Can I ask you a question as well, Patrick, just because I want an answer? And to you as well, Paul John, but to you, Patrick, because I'm jumping over your time again. If Shaun Maloney had come in as assistant manager, who would be complaining about that, or who would be saying that he's not qualified? Do you think that people would be upset at that if he came into the first team coaching team, and yet we've got people upset that he's pathways manager? So just a question to you.
That's a very good question. I'll let you answer it first, Patrick.
I mean, the caveat here is I don't really rate Roberto Martinez, which might be ridiculous to some people, but it's not a cop-out. You can ask. I genuinely think he underperformed with Belgium, and I think he's going to well, I mean, they've just won the Nations League, what am I talking about, with Portugal, but I thought a vastly overrated manager, in my opinion. So I suppose that sort of feeds into my answer. But I mean, John Kennedy, I mean, if you want to talk about pathways and knowing the club, I think John Kennedy's crucial to that first team setup. So I think to lose John Kennedy and replace him with Shaun Maloney, and I think Maloney didn't do too well at Hibs, so I'm going to stick with my guns and say I'd be disappointed if Maloney replaced Kennedy. But I mean, he is obviously vastly experienced. He's worked at a high level, good footballer. He may well be like a really good coach and just kind of take that sort of next step up. You know, a lot of people use that as a cop out for Michael Beale. I don't think that's true, but there are obviously coaches out there who are coaches and not managers. They just can't make that step up. So I see what you mean by taking a sort of different viewpoint on it. So I'll definitely be more lenient. I now can't.
Well, let's say he was added. He was added to the coaching team, the first team coaching team. Would we be complaining?
I don't think we would be complaining.
No.
I don't think we'd be complaining. Honestly, I mean, Adam Sandler. I want to always think about the movies that Adam Sandler's in when I talk about him. He was added to the coaching staff, wasn't he? And it was like an under the radar kind of thing, below the radar thing. He'd worked with Brendan at Leicester. Had Shaun Maloney come in that role, I think it would have been a positive move. I think it would have been well received, John. I honestly do. But I'm looking forward to tonight's comments after the live, Patrick, because people are going to accuse you of saying that you want John Kennedy as the manager after Brendan leaves, because that is definitely going to get lost in translation. Jay Conley, Jay Larkin, morning, Shaun Maloney to replace O'Day, interesting move. And by the way, it's also a bit of a hotbed for talent leaving the football club. John's already touched on that. Harry Kewell went away, became a manager in his own right, as did Damien Duff, as did Shaun Maloney. Remember, Shaun Maloney was a reserve team coach. That's where he started his coaching career. And he obviously went away and had his own career. Now he's back. Joe Hamilton comes in on the YouTube to say, afternoon troops, Brendan and the boys do their talking on the pitch. With some new voices, we'll be louder. Yeah, they do. They absolutely do. And I also think that when it comes down to it, Brendan Rodgers can be very cutting when the time is right. I think he times his moments, and then he comes out with something that's been bubbling under the surface for a while. There's also a lot of chat around here. Let me just try and find one of the points here in relation to Benjamin Negren. When I find it, I'll bring it up. Basically saying, why are we dragging this on? Why are we not announcing them? There we go. We've got Douglas Lynch coming in. Dougie Lynch, what's the hold up in announcing the sign of Negren? You know what? There'll be a couple of things here. I think, doesn't he enter the last 6 months of his contract on the 1st of July? I don't know if that's, and then you've got the accountancy issue. I don't know why.
The end of the financial year next Monday, 30th of June. So might be a flurry of signings on Tuesday morning. You never know.
But potentially. But again, these things are more or less improvised between, synchronized, not improvised. That's completely different. I mean, that's very opaque of me to say that. Sorry, we'll come back to that. Right? There's another T-shirt in there. synchronise. So the two clubs have to agree on it as well, don't they? They need to agree on when is this going to be announced. So I would expect it next week. And someone said last week it was going to be the 1st of July. So there will definitely be a reason behind it.
The one, can I just say, the one thing you said about Brendan making comments, cutting comments, the problem with Brendan's cutting comments is, in my memory, they appear to be always too late. So it's always after the fact, for the main, and not at a point where something can still be done about it. Although he did make plenty of comments about wanting a striker in when we get shot at Kyogo, and that didn't do any good.
No, he did. Do you think he needs to show more testicular fortitude at times, John, when it comes
I absolutely do. Yes, and I'm quite sure I used that in relation to some of the window last year. But, again, what we're now looking at, and what I said last week was, I'm really excited about, the boy in the ground coming in. That's brilliant building on the squad. What I'm really concerned about, though, is that he's just a replacement and someone else on their way out. And if Kuhn's going out, then, we're already just like for like, and we're not, we haven't made any progress in terms of the squad. We can't just replace the guys that are leaving on a sort of like for like basis and say, well, that's our business done then. No, we need to be improving on the squad. We need better guys coming in. And we need plenty of them. So, there's still a lot to be done here. And, I'm starting to get a bit concerned about the number of people I'm seeing who I would class as were connected with, who I would class as speculative or projects, or the Japanese boys, for instance. I'm not sure either of them would be first team starters from what I've read and what I've heard. And plus, we also know, as far as signing the Japanese boys go, there's about a 50-50 chance that they'll be a success. They could be fantastic. They might not be, but it's not a sure thing. And so I just don't want to go back. I'd prefer to have the sort of the Engels type signing, but at least we're guaranteed some quality. Whether you think he's the best thing since sliced bread or not, we know we've got a very, very good player who can play in the first team and hopefully develop from there. But signing guys who might not even make the first team, I don't know. I mean, look, I'm just been. I was buzzing last week, and then since then, all the links I've seen, I've just think Lowell Junior is all I'm thinking in my head. So I certainly hope that's not the way it turns out.
The biggest one that concerns me in that respect, John, in relation to whether or not we are progressing in the recruitment sense, and we've spoken a lot about that presentation that Paul Tisdale gave at the Fans Forum, where he's telling us his plans, and it sounds great, but the proof is yet to be seen and sampled. So the one name that I do see, and it might well be speculation, is the return of Miovski, the rumour of Miovski coming back into the fore. And you think to yourself, Patrick, if that was the case, if we have scoured Europe and the world, and the striker that we decide to go for is Miovski, then we've already had that file in the cabinet. It's that's where you start to think, wait a minute, how much are we progressing in terms of recruitment? And I'm not writing it off because we haven't made our moves yet. We've announced Ross Doohan. He gave a press conference yesterday. Chris McElwain was in attendance. We've obviously brought in Kieran Tierney. The young Fulham striker has not been announced yet. Callum Osman's not been announced yet. So we're waiting for these announcements, and only when we see who's in can we then start to kind of pick it apart and say I'm quite happy with that. But Miovski, that's a concern for you. It might be lazy journalism for all I know, Patrick. I've seen the name linked over the last 48 hours. If we were to buy him, I'm going to question whether we've moved on in terms of recruitment. Surely he's not the best option.
Yeah, not for me. I'd like to think there's better players and better value for money out there. It certainly would sort of stink of laziness as well to have sort of came close to signing him last season, not really bothered, and then we need a striker this summer. Let's get the old guy in. Girona are part of the City Football Group, so they know what they're doing. They know what they're talking about. They've signed him for a relatively big fee. I think it was 6-7 million. I think he was on about 60 grand a week, which is why we lost out. And he's went there. I think he scored 2 goals and barely played. So if he's not good enough for Girona, I doubt whether he's good enough for Celtic. I think although he might have had a phenomenal season at Aberdeen, I think there's players I don't know if it was this season or last season, came pretty close to his goal tally. And, I know they beat us in the Scottish Cup final, but I'm not chomping at the bit to sign any Aberdeen players this summer. So I don't think he's the quality that we're looking for. I think John's right. I think we do need to improve the squad. There's been a bit of chat about qualifiers and Champions League over the last sort of 24 hours, and I think it's vitally important we continue to qualify for the Champions League. We got a lucky draw last year, in my opinion. I think we get the best possible draw out of any team. So we know that we need to improve if we want to get into that top 24 space. We've obviously got a qualifier this year as well. I like to think our current squad can win that qualifier. But I think we've probably improved the goalie position marginally by replacing Bain with Doohan. I think as long as we get someone in better than Jeffrey Schlupp, we've improved the left back position. I've seen next to no links relating to centre halves, which is a big concern because I think we need to make improvements upon Liam Scales, and that's assuming we retain Carter Vickers. The midfield, if a midfielder goes out and we replace them like for like, it's not the end of the world. We do have a few options, and then like John says, Negrin, we're maybe losing Kuhn, we're bringing him in. Is it a like for like? Is it an improvement? At the moment, it's not obvious. Again, it's early days. That financial year thing. I think we might see a flurry come July. But I mean, it's certainly there's all sorts of different paper talk going on at the moment. Nikun seems to be the only solid one. I think that Osman that we're signing from Fulham. I know Dembele was 19 when we signed him from Fulham, but I think that Osman is going to come in as a youth player. Nikun will be a first choice. And then every other name, it sort of comes up and then goes away again after a few days. We've seen Edward, we've seen Aya, Majovski's the latest one. I think that Balak Shiva, I don't know if I'm butchering his name or not. I mean, that seems fairly concrete, but I think we are miles apart in terms of price. I think they want over 5 million.
Yeah, apparently they've binned it, Patrick, because they want over 5 million, and he apparently only played like 17 times last year because he was injured.
Right.
And that's the last thing I read. Anyway, apparently we're walking away from it because they'll not pay more than 5 million for a guy that was injured for most of last year. And then you're thinking to yourself, what's his injury record got to do with it, unless it's going to be a consistent or persistent injury? What's that got to do with it? He's either good enough or he's not. So yeah, that's the last I heard about it. Sorry to interrupt you. I would just point out that the one thing you'd expect from Osmond is it should at least be entertaining. He certainly, I know Donny could hold a tune, so should be good on the bus.
On the bus, that used to be an old thing as well. What song can you sing? Some great comments. I'm going to bring it in. Shaun Stout, here we come. Shaun Stout, Maloney briefs Celtic. He is a Celtic lad, so is only good for the club. I get that. I totally get that, Shaun, and I think that that kind of like is required with the new breed of young talented player coming through. They need to understand what Celtic is all about. McLaughlin P. I'm assuming the Negren will be announced on the 1st of July for the new yearly accounts. There could well be some administrative reason for it, I'm sure. Mr. Nobody comes in 1888. Job for the boys. Maloney back until another job becomes available. Should be employing someone for the long term, says Mr. Nobody 1888. And we've also got Brendan Monaghan, who you would have met on Friday night, John, who is loving that T-shirt. I'm just waiting for somebody.
Good lad, Brendan.
That's going to be available on DHgate and all these other places very, very soon for much cheapness. Ian McMillan. Maloney was a very skillful but inconsistent player. I seem to remember injuries playing their part in that, though. He would always have niggling muscle injuries, didn't he? Franny McKeown comes in to say totally with John. He's totally with John Collins on Kuhn. I don't believe he'll get any better than he is. He'll gain more from his experience with staying at Celtic than leaving for Leipzig. There was a few comments last night on the fact that I had relayed a story that John Collins had compared Kuhn in many ways to Paddy Roberts. And there were some comments last night comparing Kuhn to Mbappe. So I'll just leave that one right there and see which of them do you think is more accurate. James Devine comes in to say, home from Croatia, and I wouldn't miss Acsom. Brilliant. Never been to Croatia. But isn't that where Mark Viduka has a wee coffee shop in Croatia? So if you're ever up there, go in and tell Marco we said hello. Charlie Connolly, hail from a wet and cold Cape Town. We've got some friendlies coming up in July, guys. Listen to this. Queen's Park, followed by Cork City, Sporting Lisbon, which is behind closed doors, Newcastle United, which I guess will be the first opportunity for many to see Kieran Tierney in action, Ajax, and then the winners of, let me get this right, Como or Al Ali. We're going to be playing one of those teams as well. It's 6 games in the month of July. Newcastle at home's obviously quite a big one. Some of them are bounce games. Queen's Park, I think, is behind closed doors, but it will be good to get the action back, John, won't it?
Yeah, and we're playing some good teams there, and we need to be. And we need to be. I mean, I was listening to, there was another pod I don't usually listen to, but they had a guy on talking about the coefficient over the coming years, and I tell you, if we don't have a good couple of years in Europe, things are looking grim. Mm-hmm. In the medium to long term, like really grim. Like we'll be back to 3 qualifiers, all this sort of stuff. So, it could get very difficult for us to qualify for the Champions League unless we take advantage of the situation in which we now find ourselves. And that comes back to what we were talking about before, about letting fear rule your decisions, when all that's going to do is, ensure that the thing you fear comes to bear. We need to progress in Europe. We must, because with the way the coefficient's going, and then it's based on the team as well, not just the country. Your country first and then the team from that country, compared to the other countries. And, it was a long podcast, but it wasn't good. None of the news was good. Now, the only good news is that, it's on a 5-year rolling cycle, so the years drop off. Mm-hmm. And as long as we are doing better, we can try and maintain that. But, if we don't do well in Europe again for the next few years, it's going to get pretty grim trying to qualify. So we've got a big job on our hands here. But as you say, I mean, we need to be playing this type of team. But who's going to be playing them? We need. We're not, and I pray this is not the case, we're not seriously going to wait for that qualifier before we start spending money. I just can't believe they're going to do that. But every year you think, I can't believe they're going to do that, and they do. But especially this time, you're just, seriously, not again. We need guys bedded in to play that game, to make sure we win that game. And then we need guys bedded in to make sure that we progress, through the group stages. It's, we can't surely have, what am I saying? Of course we can. I'm saying we can't have the same again, but of course we can. So unless Tisdale has changed something, or unless Brendan has changed minds, then there's a good chance we get the same attitude from the board of just, we'll wait and see how we go on, which is the most self-defeating thing I can imagine.
That is the big worry. And you know what? It's not based on negativity, Patrick. It's based on just the overcautious nature at times of our board. And I know that for the best part of the season, there's been massive debates around whether or not the money spent on Engels, Ida and Trusty was well spent. And that's a debate that's going to rage on. But, I'd much rather go out and buy 3 players who have been deemed to be of a certain quality, rather than, as John has already alluded to, 8 or 9 guys in and around the £2 to £3 million mark, because that doesn't work, and it's shown not to have worked. And then there's the legacy of it not working, because you've still got a lot of the guys in the building. I know Palmer scored a great goal last night. Please don't suggest in the comments that he's going to be like a new signing, please. Palmer scored a great goal, but he's a guy that we spent £3.5 million on, Patrick, and it was a punt. It was a punt, and he was one of the guys that wasn't really well scouted. I mean, there's been discussions since he signed that he was offered to both Celtic and Rangers. He was offered to the 2 clubs, and Celtic bought him. But Rangers could easily have bought him. In terms of recruitment, that's the laziest type of recruitment, when an agent is coming and trying to punt their players to the 2 clubs in Scotland who would be able to get the transfer fee together by hook or by crook in one case, to buy that player. That's no good recruitment. That's no good scouting. Who scouted Lewis Palmer? Who went and watched the game that Lewis Palmer played in? I doubt anybody did.
Yeah, that is. I mean, it's sort of desperate and worrying all in the one go. Again, just that summer was just a pure waste of money, as you say. That Jota money, that 25 million, a lot of it down the drain. We'll be lucky to recoup half of it. But John makes a good point. I think it might even be next season that we get those 3 qualifiers. I've not sort of read up in it or listened to anything. But I mean, it's certainly soon. But it might seem a bit odd. But I choose to look at it as an opportunity. As long as it's relatively straightforward for us to get into the Champions League, that should be our absolute bare minimum. That's what we should be aiming to do. Get the sort of, I think it's 40 million now that we get for just basically being there and selling out the stadium. But I mean, if we have all those qualifiers and we drop into the Europa League, I mean, I've got in front of me some of the teams. Pot 1, Dinamo Zagreb, Real Betis, Lille, Feyenoord, Rangers. These are this is the level of Pot 1 in the Europa League. Pot 2, you've got Young Boys, you've got Maccabi Tel Aviv, Slovan Bratislava. Pot 3 and 4, it just sort of gets worse and worse. Ludogorets, Midtjylland, Karabag. We should be finishing top 8 in that competition without a shadow of a doubt. Top 8, you skip the playoff round, you're seeded and at home in the second leg of the round of 16. So you're then, presumably odds-on favourites for the quarterfinals. Now, I think the team that we have or had last season, I think they could maybe not go all the way, but they could make a good fist of it in the Europa League. I don't think we're far away. So if we do as John says, we do our business properly, we're not afraid to spend the money, and we look to improve the squad to do better in the Champions League, and the worst happens, and we lose a qualifier and we drop into the Europa League, with the quality of team that's in that, and remember, there's no drop down from the Champions League anymore. I think you stand a really good chance of making at least a quarter final, and at that stage you're 5 games away from winning it. So I choose to view it as an opportunity, but it is obviously it's a concern financially because the gulf is just ridiculous between Champions League and Europa League. But if we maintain the same strategy of preparing for the Champions League, preparing to compete in the Champions League every single summer, I don't think we should be fearful at all. I think we should win the qualifiers, and if not, I think we should be more than competitive in the Europa League.
It's a good point, and it's a very positive point. But it does go back to what John says. He's not convinced, and I think a lot of people share his fear that we will do the business, prior to the qualifiers. We've seen it before, and that's the big concern. Will there be what you'd maybe deem a statement signing? It's not about having a high profile. I mean, did Danny Engels have a high profile? Probably not, but he was a statement signing when you go out and you buy a young player from the Bundesliga at 11 million quid and break the transfer record that's been standing since Edward came to the football club. Yeah. Will there be a statement signing this summer? John, are you hedging your bets on that one?
For me, there has to be multiple statement signings because let's take Patrick's scenario. We drop in to Europa League. The prize money for winning the Europa League is 5 million, right? So that is, how much did we make in Europe this year? 35, 36 maybe?
Yeah.
Something like that. It's not even, a few years of that and we're going to be banging trouble. So we absolutely cannot be dropping. We must have a team good enough to win as many qualifiers as we have to win. We need to build a team now from a position of strength, because if we have a few years, if we wait for the rainy day money to be required, it'll be too late, because then they're going to say we can't spend the rainy day money because we need it, because things are all tight just now. This is the time. Build from a position of strength. Dominate from a position of strength. Don't wait until you're struggling and then throw up your hands and say, oh, well, what can we do? We can do something now, and we must do something now.
The thing is, John, you talk about legacies. What do you want your legacy to be if you're running a football club right now? You certainly don't want it to be that. You don't want us to get into that situation. So, yeah, very, very good discussions as always when John and Patrick are on the show. I've really enjoyed it. Thanks, everybody, for getting involved. I was having a look at the tickets for this Friday. There are only 10 left for Brian McClare and Peter Grant, 5 of which are VIP. So you can get to meet the guys, spend a bit of time with them, get something signed, and get a picture taken with Chalky and Granty as well, if you so desire. The ticket link is underneath this video. And can I just say, I had put out a lot of requests over the last couple of weeks for my next couple of gigs, and I am absolutely buzzing to say that this morning I woke up to 2 confirmation emails, and I cannot wait to get them confirmed and announced. So watch this space. Follow us on the socials. Subscribe to us on YouTube, and you'll be the first to know. Thanks, everybody, for getting involved. And thank you once again, Patrick McGill and John Hughes, for joining me on A Celtic State of Mind.
Hail, hail.